But basically, give you some background. I mean, in political science, we've not been known for doing kind of experiments. There are something in the 1920s and 30s, but we relied on other methods, observational methods. I mentioned case studies before, surveys, quantitative data. And experiments have only come in later, really since the late 1990s. And the kind of experiment I'm going to talk about today has now become incredibly common in political science. I think there are something like about 250 voter mobilisation experiments, mainly done in the US, mainly out of Yale, but other places, but since there's been a diaspora from Yale to other places doing these turnout projects. And latterly, there's been a much greater expansion across a whole range of areas using experimental methods. So in a sense, if you want to kind of pick a kind of methodology that's flavour of the month in political science, experimental method, whether it's natural experiments, RDD designs, or the kind of standard randomised control trials. And I did my first one, I like to think of I'm sort of slightly ahead of the curve in terms of political science, as it were. So I did my first one in 2004. And that was a voter mobilisation. And it's actually really nice to actually come back to this one. It's a collaboration of myself, Ed Fieldhouse, who's there, Paul, who's there, and also David Cutts, who's not here. So this is a kind of a slightly more complex experiment, which kind of takes some of the ideas of my first experiment and then applies it. And the kind of American experiments have tended to be, basically the idea is basically, we're interested in kind of what may cause people to turn out to vote. This is people going to election booths. It's not the kind of party of the vote, it's just whether you actually turn out or not. And we're interested whether some form of external mobilisation can actually stimulate people to vote on the basis of a kind of personal contact, a reminder, some sort of cue. There's a variety of different modes of those kind of contacts. And the American experiments that are characterised by two things. Firstly, they're often experiments with just two treatment arms. Basically, the arm which people are, it says that what you're trying to do is a door knock or mail shot, and a control group, maybe done in a few restricted locations. And secondly, the American experiments have tended to assume that there's a kind of hierarchy of treatment effects. And it basically works like this, that basically the more intense and personal the actual contact between the person giving the intervention and the voter, the higher the kind of treatment effect. So effectively, a kind of door knock, which is done by a volunteer kind of field force, where it says it's relatively informal, delivered on the doorstep, is going to give the highest kind of treatment effect. Whereas some kind of email, some sort of routine kind of telephone call, automated telephone call, or is going to give the kind of lowest response with other kind of treatment before. And the basic idea is quite a simple one, that obviously people respect like personal nature of the contact. And people may want to kind of be more resistant to more kind of impersonal, automated kind of contact. So that's kind of well established in the American literature. If you look at Gerber and Green, they've got a book called Get Out the Vote, second edition, maybe the third one's about to come, which kind of reviews all these studies. And that's the basic kind of claim. In Britain, we've been doing something different. I don't quite know how we got onto this track, maybe it's my fault, but we got on to basically having multi-arm treatments. And the great thing about multi-arm treatments is you can actually compare the same treatment, it's the treatment in the same study design, in the same population, rather than make inferences across many kind of different studies done in different locales. So we kind of think that's a kind of strength of our studies. They do actually bring some challenges in terms of actually sampling for those kind of populations. And the first one, which I did in a constituency, in fact you probably see it, it's somewhere down there somewhere I think, Wythenshawe, where I compared door knocks versus telephoning. And I got an identical treatment effect for both door knocks, which seems to kind of undermine and question this kind of hierarchy kind of concept. Income Fieldhouse Cutts et al. And we have actually a kind of rather more complex design where we're actually, since the overall assumption, and it's something which I kind of agree with, is we actually underestimate the value of a well-customized impersonal kind of contact. So a kind of letter coming through your mailbox may actually have quite a strong, may have kind of strong effect. Perhaps the hierarchy is something which may be observed in America. It may be actually an artifact of all these kind of multiple kind of locations. And actually, we in Britain may be actually discovering perhaps that the kind of relationship between these kind of modes is perhaps rather more complex. Also raises issues in the sense. The other thing with multi-treatment arms, it kind of also raises the issue of whether you can actually compare the treatment, but also compare whether people, if they get more than one treatment, are likely to be encouraged by that. So that's my kind of basic introduction, which actually kind of does this actually. This is a classic teaching technique where you talk, isn't it? And then you actually do a slide, and the slide actually is telling you what you just said. So basically that just kind of says what I said, that basically we've got these sort of different kinds of studies, and this is basically a kind of summary. So the interesting thing is the question as to whether there's a synergy of those effects. Now synergy means, let's say you give people two treatments, you give them a door knock and you give them a telephone call. Then you have an additive effect where you basically add together the effect of being door knocked with the effect of being telephoned, and you add it together as a kind. Or they make what's called a synergy effect, where actually in fact being contacted twice has more than the effect of just each being contacted once. I mean, with the assumption being there may be some sort of extra stimulation that actually perhaps the voter is perhaps prompted to perhaps think about things in between the interventions. And we go and test that as well. But in the US studies, doesn't find evidence for that. The other issue is, and I think this is actually becoming much more common, this is where I think the US and the UK studies are actually overlapping, is this interest in what's called in the heterogeneous treatment effects, that the actual populations may be actually quite different from each other who have been contacted, and they may actually be differently susceptible to the treatment. And that's something I'm going to be talking about. So the study is, this is the other, actually, I'm doing a kind of massive kind of sales job on the British sort of experimental, voter experimental vision. The other thing that's really surprising about the US studies is there are very few national representative kind of studies. Maybe it's the fact that the US is just so big, it just can't be done. And there are massive challenges to delivering these national studies. We can give you stacks and stacks of kind of anecdotes about how it is almost impossible going around the country. Paul will give you examples of, I think if you've been to virtually a wide variety of collecting, because basically what you've got to do is you've actually got to check the electoral registers. You can't just download something. You've actually got to go to the individual registry office to actually, and then you've got to write down, you can only write down the dates. They won't send it to you. They won't send you a photocopy. So Paul has actually been, goodness knows where, you've been sort of Cornwall, Norfolk.
Four corners of.
You probably could know more bits of Britain than so many of us in this room. So there are reasons why you might not want to do a national study, but there are great advantages because obviously one of the big problems with experiments is external validity. You don't actually know whether you can generalise. National study of lots of sample points, you're actually increasing the external validity of your study. So another kind of sort of feather in the cap for other British studies. So we have 20,000 sample electors, 90 electoral rules, don't go there. The other, actually, God, it gets even better, doesn't it? We actually, not only have we have a national, we actually have a kind of panel study, and those are actually quite rare in the American context. So basically what we're doing is we're actually going to two elections, one 2009, the European elections, and then we're going back to the general elections, where you can actually then effectively test, not only whether getting well, that allows you to test the kind of two, well, it allows you can test the two treatments in one way, then you can test whether getting something in the second way actually has it. So in a sense, the actual analytical possibilities of this little design are quite amazing. In fact, one of our problems we face is just which papers should we really be kind of starting with. We probably could write about 10 from this study. The key, what we're interested in is we're interested in these impersonal, so effectively these kind of mail shots and telephone we're studying as combined treatments. This is the mail shot, and we developed quite classically these kinds of interventions. We developed a kind of campaign which has a kind of website link. And it's a kind of voter kind of get out the vote kind of campaign. It just happens to be located in the university. Obviously, all these things go through ethical approval. And the telephone message basically is a kind of version of this. You basically can't get away with this as a telephone message. You have to kind of do a kind of more a kind of version of it. And we had our own kind of paid telephone bank where we paid PhD students or master students to kind of telephone the voters. So, and I said this design was complicated. Now maybe actually for seasoned experimenters, probably this isn't complicated. I mean, I think obviously our treatments are the norm, aren't they? For us. So basically we've got our total sample, and we have the European elections of 2009. So we have these kind of, we've randomized, so sample drawn from electoral registers. Is that right, Ed? The samples drawn from electoral registers, but we had the telephone accessible ones put into it, is that right?
They're taken from a commercial database, and then anybody that's not on the electoral register is removed. And then they're split between people who you have telephone information for and people you don't have telephone information for. But the control group balances those two groups out.
It's quite complicated because obviously if you're doing a kind of a telephone study, some people are not telephone accessible because we just have records of their telephone. So we have to kind of split the sample. In the Withenshaw study, I kind of basically only sampled telephone accessible electors. So basically I kind of extracted from electoral register anybody who had a kind of a landline telephone. And then I kind of randomized those groups into three. Big problem, that's massive selection bias there because that's kind of in a sense that's a completely selective population. And also not, so in a sense effectively you want to have a much more wider sample to go for the mail shots. Then we have the general election, which we're not reporting today, but basically you can see all the kind of opportunities we have. Effectively, we can split control. You can have we have what we call a combi treatment. So effectively you're able to compare mail, telephone, and then a kind of combi all against the control, and look at all the kind of various different combinations we can have. And this kind of generates the kind of 10 papers we're going to write over the next 3 months. But as I said, it's quite a complex structure. What I'm going to talk about is really today. And even in this, there's actually quite a lot going on. So, okay, so this is the sample size and the contact. So basically, you can see the samples of the different control group. This is wave 1, and you can see that there's only a certain number which were telephone accessible, and that's just purely the availability of telephone numbers. And then obviously, and this is another kind of issue with these, and essentially you don't get this with kind of lab-based experiments, or basically the problem is not everybody gets to treatment because people are not in. So basically you have your kind of sample, but you need to achieve a kind of sample. And I think we actually got quite a high, in Withenshaw I got a like 48% contact rate. In this one we got 57.8, which I think is quite good. All at the time, I hasten to add, when the parliamentary expenses scandal was coming out. I don't know if you know about this, Americans in the room, but well, probably do, because basically every MP was basically being lambasted. It was the kind of duck mode, the duck modes and all this sort of scandal. So when we phoned the electors, we weren't interested in being voter mobilised. They were just saying, "There's MPs, kind of thing." I mean, a lot of them just put the phone down. So I'm amazed we got this kind of this contact rate, because contact rate means being able to deliver the script. Obviously, you don't. This doesn't apply to the mail. In the mail, you have to assume that everybody gets the mail shot. So as you said, and obviously, I think probably people. It's not totally unreasonable because it does go through the door. You reasonably expect people to open their mail. But there we are. You obviously can't completely kind of verify that in the same way as you can verify the contact with telephones. For the first slide, we're going to ignore I mean, in a sense, there are ways of dealing with, in a sense, because the challenge about the contact rate is if not everybody gets the treatment, it's a kind of unfair test of the effect of the treatment. If in a sense, you're effectively kind of comparing whole groups, some of which didn't get treatment, so in a sense, you may be underestimating the kind of treatment effect. The challenge, of course, is, you know, how do you compare the portion? If you can't actually just compare the portion who got the intervention with control group, because obviously you've done something to the treatment. There are some estimation issues, quite common actually in clinical science, to get around this. For this one, ignores that issue, so you basically just see the basic turnout rate, and again we've split them up to two: the telephone accessible and the telephone inaccessible. And you can see quite interestingly that, you know, in the sense that telephone inaccessible is picking up other things about respondents other than the fact they don't have a telephone. They may be, in a sense, less easy to mobilise, less likely to vote in other respects. So basically, you've got, within the telephone accessible electors, you've got 39.7% voted in the European 2009 elections. And you can see sort of relatively modest kind of differences. There's no statistical tests at this point. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. So you've got 43.3, so you can see there's something slightly going, but not very much. And hey presto, you've got 41.3%. And then it looks like you've got some kind of combination effect of 41.8. But it says those differences aren't actually very large. Obviously, you can't compare the telephone one with a male quite in this way because of the selection problem I mentioned before. But then also in the telephone inaccessible, you can actually then also see impacts of the treatment across male and the control to show the impact. And you know, so okay, so this is the treatment effects, and so you've got many of the same kind of numbers in here. And so this just gives the basic figures of who voted and the estimate treatment effect. The line to look at is the kind of bottom line, and basically you can show it. Basically shows that, as you can see here, for the tail, the effect is not significant for the male, but for the telephone accessible. So you're already in a kind of heterogeneous kind of world here. The male accessible ones, you kind of see a treatment effect. And for the telephone, no effect. So it kind of, in some sense, what it's kind of showing, again, you kind of would assume a little bit from reading the Gerber Green literature that if you had a hierarchy, your kind of telephone call from a, I mean, I think, you know, we felt really proud of our students. They, because one of the findings from the Gerber Green literature is that the more professionalised, essentially, if you basically hire a company to do your calls, then there's going to be less of effect than the kind of student or volunteer bag. But within Shortman, I did actually hire a company. Actually, I got the same treatment effect. So maybe that may actually be wrong. But we actually were proud of our students. Although we were paying them, a lot of them were really interested in the project. A lot of them actually got on in telephoning very well, in spite of the kind of duck pond problem. So it kind of suggests that maybe there's, again, more mileage in the more impersonal male shots. So there are some, I mean, in a sense, one of the issues of this is there are lots of different ways of estimating treatment effects. So we've got male on telephone accessible is 1.6 treatment effect. Male on telephone inaccessible is 1.03. And male on electors receiving the phone call. So those are the ones which were actually accepted the treatment in a telephone group. And so you can see, but basically no real difference there. And telephone on the combination treatment group is 0.0866 less. So some relatively modest effects there. Now, the interesting question which I started with is this issue of synergy, or what you might call simple accumulation. And basically we replicate the US studies which suggest there is no synergy effect. basically, it's quite easy to calculate that. So the combined treatment effect is 2.11, which is actually less than the sum of the single treatment effects across mail and telephone, 1.6 and 1.0. So, maybe probably doesn't, and that difference is statistically insignificant. So effectively, there isn't synergy. Basically, if you telephone somebody and then you mail shot or the other way around, but you're basically getting the same effect overall as had you kind of contacted two different populations. Mentioned about modelling some of the treatment effects. In actual fact, in the slide before last, we were implementing for the telephone treatment. Basically, what you do is to estimate the treatment effect for with the treatment group where only some of them got the treatment effect. What you do is you divide the treatment effect by the kind of contact rate. And that kind of implements a sort of well-known procedure from two-stage least squares procedure, where once you just basically follow through the maths, divide through, and that kind of produces that formula. And that's been the kind of foundation stone of all the kind of American studies that kind of use this. So effectively, you can estimate a kind of accurate treatment effect. It's not the only way of dealing with these kind of selection effects. And in fact, in another project, we've been looking at, there are ways of sort of extracting from the treatment group, the various sort of subsamples, or there is the way in which you can use these what's called case models. And I think we had a talk right at the very beginning, the first introductory seminar on case models, where you can use more regression-based models to estimate it. But so far we've been kind of using this kind of standard method, and basically this can allow us to produce some basic statistical models. And the advantage with this is you can then add in various covariates. Again, we're in a kind of world of debate. In some worlds of debate, you shouldn't actually need to have covariates in a experimental model because you've randomized out all the standard determinants of the outcome variable, so you can basically isolate the treatment effect. And if your sample is kind of balanced, we shouldn't really need these things. But in practice, it allows you to kind of test for some kind of usual suspects. And if there are some kind of minor imbalances, it can actually kind of increase the kind of efficiency of the estimation. There's just a slight. So basically, this can sort of control for telephone. So it's basically you can put the whole thing. The whole thing is one of the advantages of these multi-arm treatments is effectively you can then kind of have kind of humongous regression and put the whole lot in. So basically, you can then effectively in model 1 we just control for telephone contact, and as in a sense this kind of replicates the previous findings that basically that's non-significant. The combi is non-significant, and the only thing that's significant is the kind of male contact. And basically, if you add in a whole series of kind of covariates, basically what happens is, and it shows that nothing really odd kind of going on with our model. Ed?
It's just worth adding here that one of the advantages of this model is that because you've got two exogenous independent variables, the telephone and the male. So, and some people got male, some people got telephone, some people got both. You can put them both in the model as separate independent variables and get the effect of the male across all. We'll treat the comic group and the male group. And you can get the effect of the telephone across the telephone group and the comic group, and then you can get the interaction as well, right? So it's the effect across the whole experiment, not just on the telephone group and the male group separately. So this is, I think this is neater than the separate analysis, but you might disagree.
Sorry for the discussion then. I've been told by Sarah I've got to really rush now, so what else can we show you? This kind of basically kind of replicates the previous slide in terms of treatment effects, so I'll skip that one.
They're the predicted values, so
Yeah.
they're actually the model estimates of
Yes.
treatment effects.
That's right. But it doesn't actually add any information from the... Or doesn't it? Yeah, I don't think it does. Okay. The other issue, and again, I think there have been we have had some null findings in the study, and in the spirit of the first presentation, we focused in, and we're totally upfront about that. One of the things we're interested in heterogeneity, and I think one of the kind of key causes of heterogeneity would be the levels of turnout which are actually present in different areas. So, if you look around Manchester, levels of kind of turnout vary. And obviously that would be kind of correlated with, in a sense, each of those turnouts would be kind of correlated within each other, within each district. But in actual fact, there's an assumption that that actually may have an additional impact, as it were, and that effectively in a high turnout area. I suppose it actually is quite a complex. David Nickerson has done some interesting kind of research on this, as you know, because effectively, obviously, if you do a mail shot in a really high turnout area, there's a kind of problem that if everybody's right at the very top, in a sense, every who possibly could turn out has turned out. Where can you actually go? There's a similar issue at kind of very low turnout areas. That if people are really turned off politics, they're not interested in it. A door knock, or not a door knock, a letter isn't going to persuade them. So maybe at these kind of mid turnout areas where you get the kind of effect, and that seems to be kind of borne out by the results in this. So basically, if you interact mid turnout wards with kind of male contact in the interaction term, you basically get a kind of positive effects. That's consistent with the Nickerson argument, but a lot of the other heterogeneous effects don't work out. So this is perhaps we are presenting some of our results here. So just run through the conclusions, which I think Sarah's probably desperate for me to do since I've overrun my time. Obviously there is this heterogeneity lying behind this. So telephone accessible electorate is more likely to vote. This is the attack on me, by the way. The estimates of telephone may be inflated if they only cover telephone accessible population. Our big finding is that mail had this significant effect. The magnitude was similar to telephone. The combined treatment effect was statistically significant. Evidence for an additive effect of mail, but not an synergy effect. Some limited evidence of heterogeneity of the treatment. And now we've got the results. I think the results we've got all the. I think Paul has now done his tour of Tunbridge Wells and various other esteemed places in England, and we have the registers back. So we're going to go for kind of wave 2, and we're going to write our papers. So thank you.